The air in the Silvervale courthouse was thick enough to chew. A foul meal of stale sweat, cheap whiskey, and the red Wyoming dust that seeped through the warped, clapboard walls. It clung to the back of Eliza Hart's throat. She stood alone before the makeshift judge's bench, a scarred saloon table elevated on a platform, and tried not to let the men surrounding her see her tremble. Her hands, calloused from mending fences and delivering calves, were clasped tight in front of her, knuckles white. Judge Pike, a man whose belly strained the buttons of his waistcoat, peered down at her over a pair of spectacles. His face was perpetually flushed, a testament to the quality of liquor served at the town's only tavern. He tapped a gavel on the table, a sound as cold and final as a hammer on a coffin nail. "The law is the law, Mrs. Hart," he intoned, his voice slick with false sympathy. "The territorial code is quite clear on the matter of widows and the administration of property. Without a male protector, an estate of this significance, particularly one with vital water rights, falls under the temporary purview of this court for its protection." Protection. The word was a bitter joke. She knew exactly what it meant. It meant Silas Blackthorne, whose hulking frame was propped against the far wall, would get his hands on her land. His lips twisted into a half-smile, a glint of predatory satisfaction in his dark eyes. He was not even trying to hide it. "I am protecting my land, Your Honor," Eliza said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I have worked it for 5 years. My brand is registered. My taxes are paid." "Admirable," Judge Pike conceded with a wave of his hand. "But your late husband's debts, the notes held by the bank, the community has an interest in seeing this land remains productive. A woman alone." He let the sentence hang in the stifling air. "An indictment in itself. Therefore, this court grants you a grace period, 7 days. Find a suitable male guardian to co-sign your authority, or the access to Willow Creek will be sealed pending a formal administrative review." Sealed. The word hit Eliza like a physical blow. Willow Creek was not just water, it was the lifeblood of her small ranch. It was the only thing that kept her pasture from turning to a brown, cracked wasteland like so much of the surrounding territory. Sealing it was a death sentence for her herd, for everything she had built. From the back of the crowded room, a man shifted. He had been there since the proceedings began, a silent observer leaning against the rear door frame. Cole Ashford. His name was a low murmur in Silvervale, always spoken with a mix of envy and suspicion. He had inherited the sprawling Ashford Range, a kingdom of cattle and grass that dwarfed every other holding for 100 miles. Rumor said his father had built that kingdom on ruthlessness and stolen water, and that the son was no different. He was tall, dressed in practical, well-made clothes that spoke of wealth without being flashy. A dark hat was pulled low, casting his face in shadow, but Eliza could feel his gaze on her, steady and unreadable. He made no move, no sound, yet his presence filled a space all its own. He was different from the other ranchers, from the dusty cowhands and smirking opportunists like Blackthorne. There was a stillness about him, a coiled quiet that felt more dangerous than any loud threat. The gavel banged again. "This hearing is concluded." The room erupted in a scrape of boots and low conversation. Eliza stood frozen for a moment, the judge's words echoing in her ears. 7 days. It was an impossible timeline, and he knew it. As people began to file out into the punishing afternoon sun, she felt a pluck at her sleeve. A terrible shame. "Eliza, truly," said Mrs. Gable, the owner of the general store and the town's primary distributor of gossip. Her face was a mask of concern that did not quite reach her beady eyes. "But perhaps it is for the best. A ranch is a heavy burden for a woman's shoulders. My cousin's boy, Henry, he's a strong lad, looking for work." Eliza pulled her arm away, a tight smile on her face. "Thank you for your concern, Beatrice, but my shoulders are stronger than they look, and I am not looking to hire your cousin Henry to run my life, only to stack shelves, and he seemed to find even that too strenuous." "Mrs. Gable's face soured. Before she could offer a retort, another figure stepped beside them. Deputy Nora Bell, her badge pinned to a simple, sturdy dress, nodded at Eliza. Nora was young, but her eyes held a steady competence that few men in this town possessed. "Walk with me a moment." "Eliza?" she asked, her voice low. She steered Eliza away from Mrs. Gable and toward the door. As they stepped onto the wooden boardwalk, the heat rose in a shimmering wave from the dusty street. That was a sorry piece of theater. "It felt more like a robbery," Eliza muttered, squinting against the glare. "Close enough," Nora agreed. "Listen to me. Judge Pike and Blackthorn are thicker than thieves. Whatever they offer you, whatever papers they push under your nose in the next few days. Do not sign anything tonight. Not a thing. Give me a little time." She gave Eliza's arm a quick, reassuring squeeze, and then was gone, her stride long and purposeful as she headed toward the sheriff's office. Eliza watched her go, a small knot of gratitude easing the tightness in her chest. An ally. It was more than she had dared to hope for. She turned and began the walk toward her wagon, her mind racing. What could she do? Who in this town would possibly stand with her against the combined power of the judge and Silas Blackthorn? Every man with property was too scared of Blackthorn or too eager to pick over the bones of her ranch once she was gone. The sun beat down on the livery stable's tin roof, making the air beneath it bake. As she reached for the harness to hitch her horse, a shadow fell over her. "Mrs. Hart." The voice was deep and quiet. She turned to find Cole Ashford standing there. Up close, the shadows no longer hid his face. He had a strong jaw, a straight nose, and eyes the color of a stormy sky. They held no pity, only a direct and unnerving intensity. He held his hat in his hands now, a gesture of respect that felt strangely out of place. "Mr. Ashford," she said, her tone clipped and defensive. She expected a lecture, or worse, an offer to buy her out for pennies on the dollar. "I heard the judge's ruling," he said, his gaze unwavering. "It is a misuse of the law." Eliza gave a short, humorless laugh. "That is the kindest thing anyone has called it today." "I have a proposition for you," he continued, ignoring her sarcasm. "A business arrangement, not a marriage, not a claim on your future, a simple, temporary contract of civil protection. I would act as your legal guardian in the eyes of Pike's court. The contract would be for 30 days only, and it would state, in no uncertain terms, that you retain full and sole authority over your land, your herd, and your person. At the end of the term, the contract dissolves. By then, this storm with Blackthorn should have passed or broken." She stared at him, suspicion warring with a desperate sliver of hope. Why? What did he get out of it? Men like him, men with power and money, never did anything for free. The Ashford name was built on acquiring land, not protecting it for others. "And what do you ask for in return for this service?" she asked, her voice laced with ice. "Nothing," he said. The word was so unexpected it left her speechless. Nothing she'd finally managed to say. "You would risk the anger of Judge Pike and Silas Blackthorn for nothing." "I have my own reasons for disliking the way they do business," he said, his expression unreadable. "Let's just say I have an interest in seeing that the law is not used as a club to beat honest people into the dust." Honest people. He made it sound so simple. But nothing in her life had been simple. Her late husband had taught her that. He had been a man of grand promises and easy charm. A man who had left her with a mountain of debt and a deep, abiding distrust of any man offering an easy solution. She saw the ranchers and townsfolk watching them from a distance, their faces full of speculation. To be tied to Cole Ashford, even by a piece of paper, would be to trade one kind of trouble for another. She would become the subject of endless gossip, the woman under the rich cowboy's protection. Her independence, the very thing she was fighting for, would be a sham. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Ashford," she said, her voice firm and final, "but I handle my own affairs." She turned her back on him, her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she buckled the harness. She refused to look at him. refused to see if his face showed surprise or anger or relief. She focused on the worn leather, the familiar scent of horse and hay, the simple, physical task that anchored her in a world suddenly tilting off its axis. She did not need a protector. She had survived this long on her own. She would find a way. She led the horse and wagon out into the main street and climbed onto the seat without a backward glance. The drive home was a blur of sun and dust. Her ranch was small, nestled in a valley blessed by the green ribbon of Willow Creek. The simple log cabin, the sturdy barn, the corrals she had helped build with her own hands. It was more than property. It was her sanctuary. As she approached, she saw the calm surface of her stone-lined well, reflecting the vast, indifferent blue of the Wyoming sky. It was a mirror of her hope, clear and deep, but now a shadow hung over it. That night, sleep would not come. Eliza lay in her bed, the scent of sage drifting through the open window, and listened to the sounds of the prairie, the chirping of crickets, the distant howl of a coyote, the soft snorts and rustles of her cattle settling in the nearby pasture. These were the sounds of her life, the sounds of peace. But a new sound broke the rhythm. A low, panicked moo, followed by another. Then, the distinct thud of running hooves on dry earth. Eliza was out of bed in an instant, pulling on her boots and grabbing the rifle she kept loaded by the door. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She burst out of the cabin into the cool, moonless night. The noise was coming from the west pasture, a chaotic scrambling of bodies in the dark. She ran, the rough ground jarring under her feet. By the time she reached the fence line, it was over. A section of the wire was cut, pulled down, and trampled. The pasture was quieter now. Too quiet. She could feel the absence of life. Counting in the dark was impossible. But she knew. A significant part of her small herd was gone. Panic gave way to a cold, rising fury. She scanned the ground near the broken fence, her eyes slowly adjusting to the starlight. There, pressed deep into a patch of soft dirt, was a clue, a single, clear boot print. It was large, with a distinctive star pattern on the heel, a custom design favored by the hands who worked for one man and one man only. Silas Blackthorne. The message was clear. The courtroom was just the beginning. The real fight was here, on her land, and it had already started. And tonight, she was losing. Dawn broke pale and gray, revealing the full scope of the previous night's disaster. 12 head of cattle were gone. For a small rancher like Eliza, it was a devastating loss, a cut that went straight to the bone. She stood with Marla Rodriguez by the trampled fence line, the morning air still cool against her skin. Marla, her ranch foreman and truest friend, had a face weathered by the sun and a gaze that missed nothing. She nudged the boot print with the toe of her own scuffed boot. Silas Blackthorne wears his pride on his heels, Marla said, her voice dry as dust. He might as well have left a signed letter. She was a woman of sharp wit and sharper instincts, and her presence was a steadying force against the panic clawing at Eliza's throat. "He's trying to break me," Eliza said, her voice low and hard. "He wants me to run." "Then we will disappoint him," Marla replied, turning to survey the remaining herd. The cattle were skittish, huddled together near the barn. "First, we fix the fence, then we ride the perimeter. The two hands can start on the fence. You and I will look for strays and check for wolves. A raid like this stirs them up." Their day was a blur of hard, relentless work under a sun that grew hotter with each passing hour. They found no strays. The thieves had been professionals. But Marla's prediction about wolves proved true. Late in the afternoon, they spotted a lone gray wolf, ribs showing, stalking the edge of the herd. There was no time for a clean shot from a distance. Eliza spurred her horse, her rifle cradled in her arm, closing the gap as the predator broke into a loping run. The shot was difficult, taken from a moving horse, but it was true. The wolf tumbled into the dry grass, and the herd settled. It was a small victory in a losing war, but it was a victory nonetheless. The next few days were a slow grind of survival. The drought was tightening its grip on the whole territory. The grass in Eliza's pasture was turning a brittle, faded gold. Willow Creek, her one great advantage, was running lower than she had ever seen it. The 7-day deadline from Judge Pike felt like a hangman's noose, drawing tighter with every sunset. One morning, 2 days after the raid, Eliza was hauling water from the well when she saw a wagon approaching. It was not a brand she recognized. 2 quiet, efficient men unloaded a dozen heavy burlap sacks and stacked them neatly by her barn. Hay, good, rich alfalfa, smelling sweet and green. Before she could even ask, they tipped their hats and drove off. Tucked into the rope of the top sack was a piece of paper, a bill of sale from the general store in a town 50 miles east. Paid in full, no name. A gift from a secret admirer, Marla said, kicking one of the sacks. Eliza's jaw tightened. There's only one man in this territory who can throw money around like this and not want his name on it. Her anger was a hot, bitter flood. It was Cole Ashford. He was playing with her, showing her how easily he could provide the things she was struggling for. It was not help. It was a demonstration of power. This isn't a gift. It's charity. It's his way of saying I cannot manage on my own. It's also a way of keeping your cattle from starving, Marla pointed out, ever the pragmatist. I do not care if the devil himself sent this hay, Eliza. I care that the herd eats. Her anger only deepened the next day when another wagon arrived. This one carrying a well-drilling rig and a crew of 3. They said they were hired by a benefactor to dig a supplementary well. A gesture of community support for a rancher in need. Eliza wanted to send them away, to scream that she did not need their pity. But as she looked at the cracked earth and the thirsty faces of her cattle, the words died in her throat. She stood by, arms crossed, her pride feeling like a raw, open wound, and watched them work. Marla was right. She could not afford to refuse, but accepting the help felt like a surrender. A quiet admission that she was failing. It made her hate Cole Ashford more, not less. The pressure was mounting all around her. News trickled into Silvervale that Silas Blackthorne, using his influence with the bank, was calling in loans on 2 of the smaller ranches bordering her own. The ranchers, already hit hard by the drought, had no choice but to sell. Blackthorne bought them both for a fraction of their worth. His land was expanding, encircling hers like a slowly closing fist. The evening sun cast long, dark shadows across the golden, dying fields, and it felt as if a darkness was falling over the whole valley. In Silver Vale, Deputy Nora Bell was following a hunch. The story about Blackthorne's stolen cattle did not sit right with her. He was a bully, but he was not a petty thief. This was something bigger, acting on a tip from a disgruntled warehouse worker. She used a master key to let herself into one of Blackthorne's storage sheds at the edge of town late one night. The place was stacked high with crates of whiskey and barrels of flour, but in the back, covered by a dusty canvas tarp, she found what she was looking for. Several large wooden crates, marked with the emblem of the Union Pacific Railroad. She pried one open with her nightstick. Inside, nestled in straw, were dozens of sticks of dynamite. It was enough to level a mountain. This was not about cattle. This was about clearing a path for the railroad. And it seemed Willow Creek was directly in its way. The breaking point for Eliza came on the 6th day. She had moved her remaining herd to the last patch of decent grazing on her property, a high meadow that ended abruptly at a sheer rock cliff. A sudden rock slide, likely caused by the dry, unstable ground, had blocked the main trail back down, leaving the cattle trapped on the narrow ledge. They were panicked, pushing against each other, their hooves dangerously close to the crumbling edge. It was a nightmare. Losing any more of them would ruin her completely. She and Marla and their 2 hands were trying to clear a smaller, more treacherous path, when a rider appeared on the ridge above them. It was Cole Ashford. He sat on his horse, taking in the scene below, his face impossible to read from a distance. Eliza's first instinct was to yell at him to leave, but the sight of a prize heifer stumbling, sending a shower of pebbles into the chasm below, choked the anger in her throat. She was out of time and out of options. He guided his horse down a game trail and stopped a respectful distance away. He did not offer advice. He did not take charge. He simply waited. "I need another rope and a strong horse," Eliza called out, her voice tight. "Can you anchor a line to that pine tree up there?" He nodded once, a simple gesture of assent. He dismounted, uncoiled the rope from his saddle, and went to work. He moved with a quiet competence, securing the line with practiced knots. For the next 2 hours, they worked in the hot, dusty air, and for the first time, Eliza felt a shift in the dynamic between them. She was the one in command. She knew her animals. She knew the terrain. She called out instructions, directing him and her own men, telling them where to apply pressure, how to guide the lead steer, when to hold back. And Cole Ashford followed every single one of her orders without question or hesitation. He worked like one of her own hands, pulling and sweating and calming the nervous animals with a low, steady voice. He respected her knowledge. He deferred to her authority. This was not charity. This was help, the kind one neighbor gives another. When the last cow was safely guided onto the lower trail, Eliza slumped against a rock, exhausted and streaked with sweat and grime. Cole brought her a canteen of water. "Thank you," she said, and the words were not forced this time. They were genuine. "You know your business, Mrs. Hart," he replied, his voice quiet. "You just needed more hands." He paused, his stormy eyes meeting hers. "My offer still stands. The contract, Judge Pike's deadline is tomorrow." She looked at her saved herd, their hides dusty but their bodies safe. She thought of the hay in her barn and the new well that was now drawing up clean, cool water. He had helped her, yes, but he had done it in a way that had cost her pride. Today, however, had been different. Today, he had shown her respect. Maybe, just maybe, his motives were what he said they were, and right now, she had no other choice. "There would have to be a new condition," she said, her voice gaining strength. "The contract must state that we have joint authority over the main gate to the creek, and I hold the only key." It was an audacious demand. The water rights were the most valuable asset on her property. Giving her sole physical control of the access point was an enormous concession, an act of profound trust. A long moment passed. Cole looked from her determined face toward the slow-moving water of the creek in the distance. Then he looked back at her. "That seems fair," he said. "I will have my lawyer draw it up tonight. We can sign it in the morning, before you are due in court." Eliza nodded, a wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled her knees. It was a deal with a man she did not trust, a temporary solution to a problem that felt permanent. But it was a chance. It was a breath of air when she was just about to drown. That evening, in the telegraph office in Silver Vale, the clerk handed a freshly decoded message to Judge Pike, who read it and then quickly burned it, miles away, in his makeshift office. Silas Blackthorne received a message of his own from a rider who had come from the east. It was short and to the point. The final survey was complete. They were ready. The agreement, signed and witnessed, felt as thin and fragile as a dried leaf in Eliza Hart's hand, yet it held the weight of her entire world. Judge Pike had accepted it with a sour expression. His plans thwarted for the moment, but Eliza knew this was only a reprieve, a 30-day pause in a war that was far from over. Her home pasture was nearly exhausted, a stretch of brown earth where green grass once stood. The only hope for her herd lay in the high summer grazing lands to the north, a swath of territory technically belonging to the Ashford Range but accessible to smaller ranchers by an old, unwritten agreement. So they rode. Eliza, Marla, and their two best hands drove the small herd north, a moving cloud of dust against an endless sky. Cole Ashford rode with them. His presence was a constant, unsettling fact. He was not her boss, not her protector in any real sense, but a partner of necessity. He spoke little, his eyes always scanning the horizon, his manner as quiet and vast as the land itself. Yet, he was always there, riding flank, helping to turn astray, sharing his water without a word when a canteen ran dry. It was a strange and fragile truce, held together by a shared purpose and the rhythmic plodding of hooves. On the third day, the sky began to change. The brilliant, punishing blue turned a sickly yellow at the edges. The wind, which had been a steady, hot breath, began to gust and swirl, picking up stinging clouds of sand. Marla squinted at the horizon. She said, "The sky is looking mean. We need to find cover." Cole pointed toward a low outcropping of rock a few miles ahead. He said, "There. It is not much, but it will break the worst of it." They pushed the herd hard, the cattle lowing nervously as the air grew thick and dark. By the time they reached the rocks, the world had been reduced to a roaring, blinding tempest of sand. The noise was a physical force, a constant scream that vibrated in their bones. Working together against the wind, they managed to erect a large canvas tent, anchoring its corners with heavy stones and their own supply wagons. They pushed the frightened cattle into the relative shelter of the rock overhang and stumbled into the tent, gasping for air free of grit. The world outside vanished. Inside the canvas walls, the light was a dim, orange twilight, and the sound of the storm was a deafening roar. The tent shuddered and strained against its ropes, the fabric rippling like a frantic heartbeat. Sand, fine as flour, seeped through the seams, coating everything in a layer of red dust. There was nothing to do but wait. They sat in a circle, the shared, unspoken tension a living thing in the small space. As dusk fell, turning their twilight world to near blackness, Marla made a show of checking her saddlebags. She grumbled, "Well, if we are going to be buried alive, I would rather do it on a full stomach." She passed around strips of jerky and hard biscuits, her practical nature a small anchor in the chaos. After they had eaten, she rolled herself in a blanket, tipped her hat over her eyes, and within minutes, her steady breathing announced she was asleep. The two hands had already found their own corners, succumbing to the exhaustion of the day. Eliza and Cole were left alone in the roaring dark, the flickering light of a single lantern casting long, dancing shadows on the canvas walls. Eliza spoke first, her voice barely a whisper above the wind. She said, "I have never seen a storm this bad." He replied, "It will pass. They always do." A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the howl of the wind. She found herself studying him in the lantern light. His face was streaked with dust, his eyes weary. The silence did not feel empty, but full of things unsaid. She confessed quietly, "My husband, James, he loved to make promises. He promised me a ranch that would be the envy of the territory. He promised me a life free from worry. He was good with words. He was not so good at keeping them. He left me with this land and a pile of debt so high I thought it would bury me. Every time a man offers to help, all I can hear are James's promises." She had not intended to say so much, but the storm and the darkness seemed to pull the words from her. Cole did not reply immediately. He simply listened, his gaze steady on her face. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, roughened with a sorrow she did not understand. He said, "My father did not make promises. He made demands. He saw this land, this water, and he took it. He did not use guns. Not usually. He used money. He would buy up the debt on a small ranch, divert a stream just enough to make their pasture dry up. And then he would offer to buy them out for a pittance. He called it business. The people he broke called it something else. Willow Creek. It was not always Ashford land. He bought the water rights from a family who had no choice but to sell or watch their children go hungry. I was just a boy, but I remember their faces. That is the legacy I was given. Mistress Hart. A kingdom built on what he called business." The confession hung in the air between them, more intimate than any touch. For the first time, Eliza saw past the rich cowboy, past the Ashford name, and saw the man. She saw the shame he carried, the weight of a past that was not his own making but was his to bear. Her own anger and suspicion felt suddenly small, a hard little stone that was beginning to soften. Before she could find the words to respond, a different sound cut through the storm's roar, a sharp crack, followed by a low rumble from the direction of her ranch, miles to the south. It was not thunder. They looked at each other, the same fear dawning in their eyes. Cole was the first on his feet. He said, "Stay here." But she was already right behind him, pulling on her coat. She said, "It came from the direction of my dam." They fought their way out of the tent into the maelstrom. The wind tore at them, nearly ripping the breath from their lungs. Marla, awake in an instant, followed them out, rifle in hand. It was impossible to see more than a few feet, but they could feel the change. The ground beneath their feet was growing damp. The small trickle of water that fed from Willow Creek into their camp was running faster, higher. "The dam," Eliza said, her voice strained. "Someone blew the dam." They had to get there. It was a foolish, dangerous idea, but if her small earthen dam was gone, the water level in Willow Creek would drop catastrophically. The creek would drain away into the dry plains. She would lose everything. Guided by instinct and a desperate prayer, they fought their way south through the storm. When they finally reached the small, man-made reservoir, their worst fears were confirmed. A jagged hole had been blasted in the side of the earthen wall. Water was pouring through it, a muddy torrent that was quickly eroding the breach, making it wider with every passing moment. And there, half buried in the mud, was a second bundle of dynamite, a lit fuse sputtering against the wind and the spray. There was no time to think. Cole yelled over the wind, "The fuse is waterproofed. I need to get to the blasting caps." He slid down the muddy bank toward the explosive bundle. Eliza, her mind racing, saw the problem. He could not disarm it and hold a light in this gale. She grabbed the lantern from Marla and scrambled down after him, shielding the flame with her body. She shouted, "Tell me what to do." His hands, surprisingly steady, were already working at the wires connecting the sticks of dynamite to the detonators. He said, "There are 2 wires leading to each cap. I have to disconnect them. Hold the light steady, right here." The world shrank to that single point of light on Cole's hands. The fuse burned closer, a relentless, spitting snake of fire. Her own hands trembled, but she held the lantern firm. He worked with a focused intensity, his fingers pulling at the thin copper wires. One wire came loose, then another. He moved to the second cap. The fuse was inches away. With a final, sharp tug, the last wire pulled free. He threw the severed fuse into the rushing water, where it hissed and died. For a long moment, they both knelt there in the mud and the roaring wind, their chests heaving. They were alive. As the adrenaline faded, Marla called down to them. She said, "Found something." Up on the bank, near where the saboteur must have stood, was a single, perfect boot print in a patch of sheltered mud. The star pattern on the heel was unmistakable, and next to it, dropped in the haste of the escape, was a small, folded piece of oilskin. Marla handed it to Eliza. Inside was a bank receipt, a withdrawal of $100, paid to a man named Jedediah Stone, one of Silas Blackthorne's most loyal thugs. The conspiracy was no longer a suspicion. It was a fact, written on paper. Blackthorne was not just trying to legislate her off her land. He was trying to destroy it. They trudged back to camp, soaked, exhausted, and covered in mud. The storm was beginning to abate, its fury spent. The hands were calming the herd. Cole sent 2 of his own riders, who had been trailing the drive at a distance, to report back to his main ranch. As they spoke to him in low tones by the wagon, Eliza was tending to a cut on her arm, hidden in the shadows of the canvas tent. The wind had died down enough that their words carried. One of the riders said, "Blackthorne's man got a message to us on the trail. Mr. Ashford. He said the offer is final. He gets half the water rights, guaranteed by you, or he will make sure no one gets any of it. He said he knows you want this to be over with quietly." Eliza froze. The words hit her with the force of a physical blow. A deal. He was making a deal with Silas Blackthorne behind her back. The contract, the help, the confession in the tent, it was all a lie. A calculated part of some larger game between two powerful men, a game in which she was just a pawn. He was no better than his father. He was just smarter about it. The warmth that had begun to grow in her chest turned to a block of ice. She watched him from the shadows, saw him nod to his rider, his face grim and unreadable. But she could read it now. She saw the deception, the cold calculation of a man used to getting what he wanted. He had used her trust, her vulnerability, against her, and she had let him. The shame burned hotter than any anger. She backed away into the darkness of the tent, her mind set on a single, cold purpose. She had to get away from him. Tonight. Inside the tent, a cold fury settled over Eliza. The low conversation she had overheard played over and over in her mind, each word a fresh twist of a knife, a deal. He was cutting a deal with Silas Blackthorne, using her water rights as a bargaining chip. The trust she had tentatively begun to feel for him curdled into a bitter poison. He was exactly like his father, a man who moved people and property around like pieces on a game board. She was a fool for thinking he was any different. She moved with a quiet, deliberate rage. The sandstorm had passed, leaving behind a sky washed clean and studded with cold, distant stars. The camp was quiet, the others lost in an exhausted sleep. Marla and the hands were in their own bedrolls under the rock overhang. Only Cole remained in the large canvas supply tent that had become their temporary shelter, his back to her as he cleaned the mud from his rifle by the light of a low-burning lantern. Her saddlebags were near her bedroll. She began to pack her few belongings, her movements swift and silent. Her spare shirt, her canteen, the small tin of coffee. She would ride back to her ranch alone. She would face Blackthorne alone. It was better than being a pawn in Cole Ashford's game. She would rather lose everything on her own terms than be saved by a liar. With her bag slung over her shoulder, she crept toward the tent flap. The canvas was heavy, and she lifted it slowly, careful not to make a sound. The cool night air hit her face, a welcome shock after the stifling confines of the tent. Freedom was just a few steps away. She could slip out into the darkness, find her horse, and be gone before anyone even knew she was missing. She tried to escape the rich cowboy's tent until his hands claimed her gently. He did not grab her. He did not restrain her. His hands closed over hers, covering them where she gripped the edge of the canvas. His touch was surprisingly warm, his grip firm but not forceful. It was a touch that asked, not demanded. She froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. She did not turn around. She could not bear to look at his face, to see the false concern she was sure would be written there. Cole's voice was low, just behind her. He said, "Please, do not go." She tried to pull her hands away, but he held them fast. She said through gritted teeth, "Let go of me." He said, "Not until you listen. I heard what my man said. I know what you must be thinking." Eliza's voice dripped with scorn. She said, "I am thinking that you are a very good actor. Mr. Ashford, that fireside confession, the story about your father. It was a very touching performance. Did you rehearse it?" She felt him flinch, though his grip on her hands did not loosen. He said, "It was not a performance. It was the truth, just as this is the truth. Please, Eliza, turn around." Against her better judgment, against every screaming instinct telling her to run, she slowly turned. The lantern light cast deep shadows across his face, making it impossible to read his expression. But his eyes, they held a desperate sincerity that shook her to her core. He released one of her hands and reached inside his coat. He pulled out a folded piece of paper, not the flimsy agreement they had signed in Silver Vale, but a thick, official-looking document bearing the seal of a territorial lawyer. He held it out to her. He said, "Blackthorne has been trying to make a deal with me since the day I arrived back in this territory. He assumes that because I am my father's son, I will do business the same way. He thinks he can threaten and bargain his way to getting what he wants. He offered to stop the attacks, to call off Judge Pike, if I would sign over half of Willow Creek's water rights to him. Eliza stared at the paper. Not taking it, she said, "And you are telling me you refused?" He said, "I am telling you that this is what I had my lawyer in Cheyenne draw up the day we met. It is why I came to find you after the hearing." Her hand trembled as she took the document from him. She unfolded it. It was a legal deed transfer, in clear, undeniable language. It unconditionally and irrevocably signed over 50% of the primary water rights of the Ashford Range, specifically the headwaters of Willow Creek, to one Eliza Hart. It was signed, dated, and witnessed. It was not a temporary contract. It was permanent. She read it twice, the legal jargon swimming before her eyes. She whispered, "Why?" He said, "Because it was never my father's to own in the first place. And it is the only way to be sure that no one, not Blackthorn, not Judge Pike, not even me, can ever take it from you. With this, you are not my ward. You are my equal partner." The anger drained out of her, leaving her weak and trembling. The entire foundation of her fury, the certainty of his betrayal, had crumbled to dust. She had been so wrong. Her fear, her pride, her past with James, had blinded her to the truth. She looked up at him, and for the first time, she truly saw him. She saw the lonely boy who had watched his father break an honest family. She saw the man trying to right a generational wrong, a man willing to give away a fortune to do it. A sob escaped her, a sound of shame and relief and a dozen other emotions she could not name. She said, "I am sorry. I heard, and I just assumed." He finally let go of her other hand and took a hesitant step closer. He said, "You have had every reason to assume the worst. I have not made it easy for you to trust me." The small space between them was charged with a new kind of tension. The roar of the sandstorm had been replaced by a profound silence, broken only by the soft crackle of the lantern. The tent, which moments before had felt like a prison, now felt like the only safe place in the world, a shelter from the harshness of the land, a place where the truth could finally be spoken. She did not know who moved first. It did not matter. One moment they were standing apart, the next she was in his arms, her face buried in the rough fabric of his shirt. His arms came around her, holding her tightly, his chin resting on the top of her head. It was not a gesture of passion, but of comfort, of solace. It was two lonely people, survivors of different kinds of storms, finding a moment of peace. He smelled of leather and dust and the clean, cold night air. She could feel the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. She held on to him, letting the warmth of his body seep into hers, chasing away the chill of her fear and doubt. When she finally tilted her head back to look at him, his face was very close. The lantern light softened the hard lines of his jaw, and his stormy eyes were dark with an emotion she did not dare to name. He lowered his head, and his lips met hers. The kiss was gentle at first, a hesitant question. She answered by leaning into him, her hands coming up to cup his face. The kiss deepened, becoming a release of all the tension, all the fear, all the unspoken things that had passed between them since the moment they first saw each other in that dusty courtroom. It was a promise made without words, a sealing of the truth they had finally found in each other. He drew her closer, and as the lantern flame flickered and cast their intertwined shadows against the canvas wall, the world outside, with all its dangers and its deadlines, simply faded to black. The next morning, they were awakened by the sound of an approaching rider. It was Nora Bell, her face grim. She had ridden through the night. She wasted no time on pleasantries. She said, "I have proof. A telegraph operator in Cheyenne is a friend of my father's. He confirmed that Judge Pike has received 3 separate wire transfers from an account controlled by the Union Pacific Railroad. Silas Blackthorn is just the muscle. The railroad wants the water from Willow Creek. They are planning to build a major rail depot and cattle yard in the valley. They need a guaranteed water source, and your ranch is sitting right on top of it." The news landed with a heavy thud, explaining everything. The dynamite, the legal pressure, the desperation. This was bigger than a land grab. This was about the relentless march of progress, a force that could crush anyone who stood in its way. As if summoned by the news, another rider appeared on the horizon, this one wearing the star-heeled boots of Silas Blackthorn's outfit. He rode into their camp, his horse kicking up dust, and stopped before the group, a smirk on his face. He did not dismount. He looked directly at Cole, ignoring Eliza completely. He said, "Blackthorn sent me. He says your time is up. You have 48 hours to deliver the water rights, signed and sealed, or he is coming to take them." Blackthorn's ultimatum hung in the air, as cold and sharp as the wind that was beginning to blow from the north. 48 hours. It was not a negotiation. It was a declaration of war. There was only one place to fight this battle in the heart of Silver Vale. They rode back into town not as a defeated party, but as a united front. The news of the railroad's involvement, carried by Nora Bell, had spread like wildfire. A town meeting was called in the saloon, the only building large enough to hold the anxious crowd of ranchers, merchants, and townsfolk. The room was packed, the air thick with the smell of wet wool, fear, and stale beer. Silas Blackthorn stood near the bar, flanked by his men, confident and imposing. He had paid a few struggling ranchers to speak on his behalf, men whose fear of the bank was greater than their sense of community. They spoke of progress, of the jobs the railroad would bring, of the prosperity that would flow into Silver Vale. They painted Eliza as a stubborn woman standing in the way of the future, and Cole as an outsider interfering in local affairs. When it was Eliza's turn to speak, a hush fell over the room. She did not stand on the makeshift stage, but walked to the center of the floor, so she was surrounded by her neighbors. She looked not at Blackthorn or Judge Pike, but at the faces in the crowd, the blacksmith, the Gables from the general store, the families she had known for years. Her voice was not loud, but it was clear and steady, and it cut through the tension. She said, "I hear you all talking about the future, about money and jobs and progress, but I want to talk about right now. I want to talk about the water that you use to brew your beer, to wash your children's faces, to grow the food in your gardens, Silas Blackthorn and the railroad. They do not see water. They see a commodity, something to be bought and sold, something to put a price on. But you cannot put a price on a thirsty child. You cannot bargain with a dying field. They are offering you a future built on something they are willing to kill in the present. Water is life. It is not a product for sale to the highest bidder." A murmur went through the crowd. Her simple words held a truth that resonated more deeply than all the talk of railroad contracts. Blackthorn laughed, a harsh, grating sound. He said, "Those are pretty words from a woman about to lose everything. The law is on my side, and I have a contract that Mr. Ashford is going to sign." All eyes turned to Cole, who had been standing silently at the back of the room. He walked forward and stood directly behind Eliza, a quiet, unshakable presence at her back. He met Blackthorn's gaze, his own eyes as cold as a winter sky. Cole's voice was calm, but it carried to every corner of the saloon. He said, "You are mistaken. Blackthorn, I will not be signing your contract. I have already signed a different one. Several days ago, I signed a legal deed, transferring 50% of the primary rights to Willow Creek to Mistress Hart, permanently. Whatever happens to me, whatever happens to my ranch, she holds half the water. She is my equal partner." The saloon erupted. The idea was stunning, an act of generosity and partnership so far outside the normal run of business that people could hardly comprehend it. Eliza felt a warmth spread through her chest. He had not just given her the deed, he had given her his public, unwavering support. He had chosen his side, and he had chosen her. Reverend Ames, the town's quiet moral authority, who had been watching with a troubled expression, now looked at Cole and Eliza with a new, profound respect. The town was shifting, a slow, seismic turn away from fear and towards something that felt like courage. It was then that nature chose to cast its own vote. the wind, which had been rattling the windows, suddenly rose to a terrifying howl. The saloon door flew open with a crash, admitting a blast of frigid air and a flurry of white snow. A heavy, wet, unseasonably early snow was falling, blanketing the world in a blinding sheet. Panic broke out. The ranchers with herds still in the high country knew what this meant. A sudden storm like this could be a death sentence for their cattle, trapping them in drifts, burying their feed. The meeting dissolved into a chaotic rush as men scrambled for their horses and coats. The blizzard raged for a full day and night, a white fury that isolated the town and the surrounding ranches. When it finally broke, the world was transformed into a landscape of stark white and deep, treacherous drifts. The news that came in was bad. Eliza and Cole's herd, along with those of several other families, was trapped in the northern pastures, the trails completely impassable. Without hesitation, Cole and Eliza began to organize a rescue. They gathered every able-bodied man and woman, every shovel and draft horse they could find. This was no longer about a legal fight. It was about survival. And in the West, you did not let your neighbors face a storm alone. The work was brutal. They dug through drifts as tall as a man, their lungs burning from the cold air, their muscles screaming with effort. Cole led one team, Eliza another, their shared purpose forging a bond between them stronger than any legal document. The people of Silver Vale, who had so recently been watching them with suspicion, now worked alongside them, sharing food, warmth, and a desperate hope. In the midst of the struggle, small acts of heroism shone like beacons. They found the Miller family's cabin nearly buried, their youngest son shaking with a high fever. Dr. Chen, the quiet, respected Chinese herbalist and physician who was with the rescue party, worked through the night by lantern light, using his skill to bring the fever down, his calm presence a balm to the terrified parents. Further on, they found the trail washed out by a freezing, fast-moving creek. Old Martha Gable, Beatrice's mother-in-law, had fallen and could not walk. The water was too deep and cold for her to cross. Without a word, Marla Rodriguez, who was as strong as any man, hoisted the old woman onto her back and carried her across the icy torrent, her own legs numb but her will unbroken. These acts did not go unnoticed. The people of the valley saw Eliza not as a stubborn woman, but as a leader, working herself to exhaustion for the good of all. They saw Cole not as a rich, aloof land baron, but as a man willing to risk his life for his neighbors. The community, fractured by suspicion and fear, was being forged anew in the crucible of the storm. They were no longer just a collection of individuals. They were becoming a town. Their combined efforts were successful. They reached the stranded herds and managed to clear a path, driving the half-frozen cattle down to the safety of the lower valley. Exhausted, cold, but united, the rescue party returned to Silver Vale as heroes. The atmosphere in the town had changed completely. The tide of public opinion had turned decisively in their favor. Silas Blackthorne saw it, and it drove him to a cold fury. He had lost control of the narrative. He could no longer use the law or public opinion as his weapons. His power was slipping through his fingers. Desperate, he turned to the only tool he had left: brute force. That evening, as the town celebrated the return of the cattle, Nora Bell was walking home from the sheriff's office. Two of Blackthorne's men stepped out of a dark alleyway. Before she could even reach for the pistol on her hip, they grabbed her. A rough hand clamped over her mouth. They dragged her into the darkness. An hour later, a boy from the livery stable delivered a crumpled, dirty note to the saloon, where Cole and Eliza were sharing a hot meal with the other ranchers. Cole took it, his face hardening as he read the crude scrawl. He passed it to Eliza. The message was 4 words long. "Trade the girl for the water." The crude note felt like a block of ice in Eliza's hand. The warmth and camaraderie of the saloon evaporated, replaced by a cold, metallic fear. Nora, a prisoner, traded like livestock. Blackthorne had crossed a line, moving from legal intimidation and property damage to an act of open warfare against the law itself. panic was a useless indulgence. In its place, a hard, clear resolve began to form. Cole Ashford's face was a mask of controlled fury. He looked at Eliza, and in his eyes, she saw not a question, but a statement. They would not break. They would not bargain. They would bring her home. The plan came together in the quiet of the late night, whispered over a map spread across a table in the sheriff's empty office. It was a two-pronged attack, a trap for both the muscle and the mind behind the operation. Marla, Cole, and a dozen of the town's best men, now fiercely loyal, would ride for Serpent Gulch, the twisting, narrow canyon where Blackthorn was most likely holding Nora. It was a natural fortress, easy to defend, but also a perfect place for an ambush if you knew the terrain. The second part of the plan was Eliza's. It was a gamble, a piece of theater designed to trap a rat. She said, "Pike is the key. Blackthorn is just a rabid dog, but Pike gives him the cover of law. We need to expose him, and we need to do it in a way no one can deny." They needed Pike's confession, and they would get it in the language of the modern world, the clicking tongue of the telegraph. Before her capture, Nora had told Eliza about her suspicions and about the telegraph operator's connection to her family. More than that, Nora, fascinated by the technology, had worked with the operator to install a simple device of her own design on the line, a mechanical recorder that embossed the Morse code signals onto a long strip of paper tape. It was meant for keeping official records, but tonight it would be their scribe for justice. They sent a message to Judge Pike, a message supposedly forwarded from Blackthorn's men. It was simple. Deal agreed. Bring legal deed for Ashford water rights to telegraph office. Transfer imminent. Awaiting final confirmation. It was a bait he could not resist. He would want to oversee the final moments of his victory himself. As the riders prepared their horses in the cold darkness, Eliza and the telegraph operator, a nervous young man named Samuel, waited in the small, cramped office. The air smelled of ozone and hot metal. The plan was for Cole's party to create a distraction at the canyon, at which point Samuel would telegraph Pike, telling him Blackthorn needed his immediate confirmation to proceed. Every word Pike typed in response would be etched onto the paper tape. The hours crawled by. Finally, a rider galloped back from the advance scouts. Blackthorn was in Serpent Gulch, just as they had suspected. He had Nora tied in the open, a clear warning against any attack. He had men with rifles on the canyon rims. The time had come. Samuel's fingers trembled as he began to tap the telegraph key. Miles away, in the moon-shadowed maze of Serpent Gulch, Cole's party dismounted, moving like ghosts through the rocks. The plan was not a frontal assault. It was chaos. On Cole's signal, men positioned high on the ridge sent a half-dozen large boulders crashing down into the canyon floor. The sound was like a cannonade, echoing off the rock walls, sending horses screaming and Blackthorn's men scrambling for cover. In the confusion, torches were thrown, casting wild, dancing shadows and setting fire to clumps of dry sagebrush. The battle for Serpent Gulch had begun. It was a dirty, close-quarters fight. Gunshots flashed in the darkness, brief bursts of light and noise. It was not a battle of lines and charges, but of skirmishes, of men wrestling in the dirt and shadows. Back in the telegraph office, the machine suddenly clattered to life. Pike was responding. Samuel began to translate the clicks, his voice a low whisper. "Pike, what is the delay report?" Samuel, his face slick with sweat, typed back, his message composed by Eliza. "Blackthorn ambushed. Need confirmation railroad will cover expenses. Urgent." The lie was a desperate one. They were betting on Pike's greed and arrogance, betting he would be more worried about his payout than the safety of his hired gun. The clicking response came faster this time, angrier. "Pike Railroad contract is ironclad. Finish the job and get the deed. I will handle the rest." Samuel looked at Eliza, his eyes wide. He whispered, "He is admitting it." In the canyon, Cole had managed to draw the fire of the men on the ridge, giving Marla and two others the chance to slip around the flank toward Nora. Blackthorn, enraged by the attack, was roaring orders, firing his pistol into the darkness. Eliza took a deep breath. She told Samuel, "One more message. Tell him Blackthorne is demanding double, or he will expose Pike and the railroad both." It was the final turn of the screw. The telegraph key chattered furiously. Pike's message was a stream of panicked, self-incriminating dots and dashes. "Pike, fool. Do not threaten me. The payments are secure. The entire territorial expansion depends on this. Finish it now." It was a full confession. Every click and clack was a nail in Pike's coffin, permanently recorded on the spool of paper tape. The quiet, rhythmic sound was the voice of justice, speaking in the dead of night. Just as Samuel finished receiving the message, the door to the office burst open. It was not Judge Pike. It was Blackthorne himself, his face a mask of fury, dragging Nora behind him. One of his men was with him, pistol drawn. The ambush was a feint. He had left a few men behind to make noise while he came back for the prize himself. He snarled, "You think you are clever." He saw the telegraph, the spinning paper tape, and his eyes widened in understanding. He lunged for it. At that same moment, in Serpent Gulch, the real climax was unfolding. With Blackthorne gone, Cole and his men pressed their advantage. Cole took a bullet, a fiery line of pain across his ribs, but he stayed on his feet. Marla reached Nora's real location, a small cave guarded by two of Blackthorne's men, and dispatched them with a cold, brutal efficiency. She found not Nora, but a trussed-up ranch hand, a decoy. The realization hit them all at once. Blackthorne was not in the canyon. He was in town. In the telegraph office, Blackthorne shoved Nora toward his man. He said, "Watch her." He grabbed a heavy crate from the corner of the room, the same type Nora had found in his warehouse. Dynamite. He tore the lid off with a crowbar. He was going to destroy the office, the evidence, and everyone in it. He pulled out a stick, a fuse already attached. As he struck a match, the small flame illuminating the madness in his eyes, Eliza moved. She was not thinking. She was acting. The rifle she had carried from her ranch was leaning against the wall. She grabbed it, raised it, and fired. The shot was deafening in the small room. The match flew from Blackthorne's hand. He screamed, clutching his wrist where the bullet had torn through flesh and bone. The stick of dynamite fell to the floor. Cole, bleeding but moving fast, burst through the door, his pistol leveled. He had raced back the second he realized the deception. He fired once, and Blackthorne's remaining man crumpled to the floor. But the danger was not over. The lit match had fallen near the open crate of explosives. A stray spark ignited the main fuse leading into the box. As Cole pulled Eliza toward the door, Marla charged in behind him. She did not hesitate. With a powerful, desperate kick, she sent the crate of dynamite sliding across the floor and out the open doorway. It tumbled off the boardwalk and into the muddy street, where it exploded with a deafening roar, blowing a massive crater in the road and shattering every window on the block. They stood in the ruined doorway, ears ringing, the smell of burnt powder thick in the air. Silas Blackthorne was on the floor, groaning, his power broken. Nora was safe, and in Samuel's trembling hands was a long paper tape, a testament to the night's work. Suddenly, the street was filled with riders, but they were not Blackthorne's men. It was the sheriff from the next county over, flanked by a dozen deputies, their badges glinting in the light from the burning debris. Nora, ever the strategist, had sent a telegraph for aid days ago, before she was taken, anticipating that things in Silver Vale would soon move beyond the control of a compromised local lawman. They cuffed a whimpering Silas Blackthorne. They took Judge Pike into custody at his home, the paper tape serving as an irrefutable warrant. The fight was over. The community, drawn by the explosion, gathered in the street, their faces a mixture of fear, awe, and a dawning respect. They had faced down a tyrant and won. As the sun began to rise, casting a pale light over the wreckage, a lone rider approached. He was not a lawman or a rancher. He was dressed in a city suit, his face clean-shaven and serious. He stopped before Cole and Eliza. He said, "I represent the Union Pacific Railroad. It appears we have a great deal to discuss. We are prepared to offer a new contract for access to the water, a fair one. But our board has one condition. The contract will not be with an individual. It must be with a community board, elected by the people of Silver Vale, to manage the water for the good of all." The morning after the explosion dawned quiet and painfully bright. The sky was a clean, cold blue, and the fresh snow made the wreckage in the street look even starker and more ugly. The town of Silver Vale was wounded. Windows were shattered. The telegraph office was a ruin, and a deep crater scarred the main road. But the town was not broken. There were wounds on the people, too. Cole's side was tightly bandaged where the bullet had grazed him, a constant, dull ache. Several of the men who had ridden to Serpent Gulch had cuts and bruises, and there was a deeper, more somber cost. One of Blackthorn's men had been killed in the fighting, a young man with a foolish desire for easy money. He was buried in a simple pine box in the corner of the town cemetery, a grim reminder of the price of greed. Eliza stood before a small gathering of townsfolk near the new grave. The air was still and cold. She was not a preacher or an official, but the people looked to her now. She had become the heart of their resistance, and now she was the voice for their grief and their gratitude. She said, "We are here today because choices were made. A choice to take and a choice to defend. A choice to break a community and a choice to build one. We have all lost something in these past weeks. Sleep, peace, a sense of safety. But we have found something, too. We have found our courage. We have found our voice. And we have found each other. Let us not forget the cost of this victory. And let us never forget what we were fighting for. Not just water, but the right to call this place our home." Her simple words settled over the crowd, a balm on a collective wound. They were no longer just a collection of individuals scrambling for their own survival. They were a community, bound by a shared fight and a shared hope. The railroad representative's offer was the talk of the town. The idea of a community board, a water cooperative, was radical. For generations, water had been a source of conflict, something to be owned and jealously guarded. The thought of sharing it, of managing it together, was a leap of faith. They met again in the saloon, its windows boarded up but its spirit intact. The railroad man laid out the terms, a fair price for the water they needed for the new depot, paid not to an individual, but to a town fund for improvements, and a charter for the Willow Creek Water Cooperative, to be managed by a board of 5, elected by the people. It was Reverend Ames who spoke first. He said, "For too long, power in this valley has rested in the hands of the few. We have seen what that leads to. Perhaps it is time we learn to trust the wisdom of the many." Cole and Eliza stood before them. Cole said, "The deed that gives Mistress Hart half the rights to Willow Creek is legally binding, but we both believe the water belongs to the valley. We will enter our rights into this cooperative, and we will each hold one vote, the same as every one of you." His statement sent a wave of shock and respect through the room. For an Ashford to willingly give up that much power was unthinkable. It was the final, definitive break from his father's legacy. The vote was unanimous. The cooperative was formed. The next day, in a simple ceremony, a blacksmith forged a new, ornate key for the main sluice gate. It was not given to Eliza or to Cole. It was hung on a hook inside the new community hall, a building they had all agreed to build with the first payment from the railroad. The water now belonged to everyone. That evening, the air was still and full of a quiet, exhausted peace. The work of rebuilding had begun, and a sense of shared purpose hummed through the town. Cole stood with Eliza on the boardwalk, watching the last colors of sunset fade behind the mountains. His grand house on the Ashford Range, with its empty rooms and ghosts of the past, was waiting for him. Eliza turned to him, her face serious in the twilight. She said, "Do not go up to the big house tonight. Come home with me." The invitation was simple, but it was everything. She was not asking to be taken into his world of wealth and power. She was inviting him into hers, into the small log cabin she had fought so hard to protect. She was offering him a place at her table, by her fire, as an equal. He looked down at her, and a slow smile spread across his face, a genuine smile that reached his stormy eyes and transformed them. He said, "I would like that very much. Eliza." Her home was small and warm, filled with the scent of wood smoke and drying herbs. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting a warm, flickering glow over the simple wooden furniture. Marla was there, stirring a pot of stew that filled the cabin with a rich, savory aroma. She looked Cole up and down, a mischievous glint in her eyes. Marla said, "Well, Mr. Ashford, now that the shooting is over, we come to the important questions. I have known rich men and I have known poor men, but there is only one thing a woman truly needs to know about a man. Can you wash a dish?" Eliza tried to hide a smile. Cole laughed, a real, unburdened laugh that made him seem younger. He walked over to the wash basin, picked up a clean cloth, and made a great show of inspecting it. He said to Marla, "Ma'am, for a dance with the finest woman in this territory, I would wash every dish from here to Cheyenne." He winked at Eliza. After the simple, delicious meal, Marla discreetly announced she was going to check on the horses, leaving them alone in the firelight. An easy silence settled between them. The battles were over. The secrets were gone. There was nothing left but the quiet truth of two people sitting together in a small, safe room. Cole reached across the small space that separated their chairs and took her hand. His hand was large and calloused, but his touch was gentle. It was the same touch she had felt in the tent, a touch that asked, not demanded. He said, "For a long time, I thought my life was about running away from my father's name, trying to undo what he did, but being here, with you, I feel like I am finally running towards something." Eliza's fingers tightened around his. She said, "I spent so long building walls, I thought that was what strength was, being able to stand alone. You taught me that true strength is about choosing who you let inside." He stood and pulled her gently to her feet. He did not kiss her immediately. He just held her. His arms wrapped around her as they stood before the fire. She leaned her head against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart. All the fear she had carried for so long, the fear of debt, of loneliness, of betrayal. It all seemed to melt away in the warmth of the fire, in the solid, comforting circle of his arms. This was not a surrender. It was not a contract or a bargain. It was a choice, made freely, by two people who had seen the worst of each other in the world, and had found the best in each other. He tilted her chin up, and his lips found hers. It was a kiss of quiet promises, of shared futures, of a peace that had been hard won. They held each other, two hands clasped together, a silent vow to face whatever came next. Together, the fire crackled, the shadows danced, and for the first time in a very long time, Eliza Hart felt completely and truly safe. But the land was not finished with them yet. The days turned into a week, and then 2. The snow from the freak blizzard melted under the relentless sun, but the life-giving autumn rains did not come. The sky remained a hard, cloudless blue. The ground grew dry and cracked. Willow Creek, now shared by all, was running low. One afternoon, a rider came from the south, his face etched with worry. It was John Miller, the man whose son Dr. Chen had saved. His ranch was downstream, and his well had run dry. His fields were dying. He had been one of the men who had spoken against Eliza in the saloon that first day. Now he stood before the newly formed community board, his hat in his hands, his pride humbled by desperation. He said, "We need water, even just for a day. If you could open the main sluice from the reservoir, it might be enough to save my crops." The board looked at Eliza, and Cole. Opening the gate now would mean sacrificing a significant portion of their own carefully rationed water. Water they needed to ensure their own ranches survived the coming winter if the rains failed to appear. It would be a risk, a sacrifice for a man who had been their opponent. The first true test of the Willow Creek Water Cooperative had arrived, not in the form of a villain with a gun, but in the guise of a desperate neighbor and a cloudless sky. The silence in the new community hall was as heavy as the dried dust motes dancing in the sunbeams. John Miller stood before the 5 elected members of the water board, his head bowed, a man broken by the unforgiving sky. His plea for water echoed in the quiet room, a choice laid at their feet, his survival or their security. The other board members, good people who had fought alongside Eliza, shifted in their chairs. They looked at the numbers, at the worryingly low level of the reservoir. They thought of their own families, their own herds, and the long, dry winter that might be coming. Their hesitation was not born of malice, but of a deep, gnawing fear. It was Eliza who broke the silence. She rose from her seat and walked to stand before the farmer. She did not look at the board or at Cole. She looked at John Miller, at the desperation etched into the lines on his face. This man had stood against her, had believed the whispers and the lies, but in his eyes now, she saw not an enemy, but a neighbor. She saw a mirror of the same fear she had felt when Judge Pike's gavel fell like a death sentence. She turned to the board, her voice clear and carrying the weight of all she had learned. She said, "We called this the Willow Creek Water Cooperative. The word is cooperative, not preservation, not ownership. If that word means anything, it means we stand together when the times are good, and we hold each other up when they are hard. I know what it is to watch your fields die. I know what it is to look at the sky and pray for a cloud that never comes. We did not fight Silas Blackthorne just to become him. We did not break his dam just to build our own. We fought for the idea that this water is life, not just our life, all life in this valley." She looked at Miller again. She said, "He is our neighbor. His children are our children's friends. We must open the gate." A deep silence followed her words. The risk was enormous. It was an act of faith in a future they could not see, a bet against the brassy, empty sky. Cole stood up. He did not need to speak long. He walked to stand beside Eliza, a solid, unwavering presence. He looked at the board members, his gaze steady. He said, "I stand with her. The water we release is our share as much as anyone's. We cannot save ourselves by sacrificing our neighbors. It is not a victory if we are the only ones left standing at the end." His words, combined with hers, broke the spell of fear, one by one. The other board members nodded. A quiet shame turned to a firm resolve on their faces. The decision was made. The community, moved by the act of grace toward a man who had opposed them, walked together from the hall to the sluice gate. Cole took the heavy iron key from its hook, but he did not use it. He handed it to John Miller. With trembling hands, the farmer unlocked the gate. The great iron wheel was stiff, and it took 4 of them, Cole, Eliza, Miller, and another rancher, to turn it. With a low groan, the gate lifted, and a surge of precious, life-giving water rushed into the dry creek bed, flowing south toward a dying farm. They stood and watched it go, a silver ribbon of hope disappearing into the parched land. It was the riskiest, most foolish, and most necessary thing they had ever done. For 3 days, the sky remained stubbornly clear. A quiet worry began to creep back into the town. The reservoir was noticeably lower. People watched the horizon, their faces tight with anxiety. They had made their choice, their noble, foolish choice, and it seemed the heavens would not reward them. Then, on the 4th morning, the air changed. The wind shifted, carrying a cool, damp scent, the smell of distant rain on dry earth. By noon, the first clouds appeared, not the thin, wispy mare's tails of a dry sky, but heavy, gray-bellied clouds that promised relief. The first drop of rain hit the dusty street with a small, sizzling puff, then another, and another. Within an hour, a steady, soaking rain was falling. It was not a violent storm, not a blizzard or a deluge, but a gentle, persistent rain that the thirsty ground drank in greedily. People came out of their homes and businesses, not to seek shelter, but to stand in it. They lifted their faces to the sky, letting the cool water wash away the dust and the fear. The rain fell all day and all night. A soft, percussive rhythm on the rooftops, the sound of a promise being kept. Willow Creek began to rise, its waters running full and clear again. And in the small orchard that Eliza and Cole had planted behind her cabin, the tender green leaves of the young apple saplings glistened with moisture, their roots drinking deep, reaching for a future that was now secure. Weeks later, when the valley was green again and the threat of the drought had passed, the town gathered not for a trial or a meeting, but for a celebration. There was no formal church wedding. It would not have suited either of them. Instead, Eliza and Cole stood before their friends and neighbors in the shade of a large cottonwood tree down by the creek. Nora Bell, her new sheriff's badge gleaming on her chest, officiated. She had become the symbol of the new Silver Vale, a place where the law was just and the community was strong. Marla stood beside Eliza, her face beaming. She had already started her new enterprise, a riding school for the town's children, and her laughter could be heard all across the valley. Nearby, Dr. Chen stood with the Miller family, his project to build a proper town apothecary and clinic fully funded by the community board. Eliza and Cole faced each other. They did not exchange rings. Instead, they joined hands. Cole spoke first, his voice clear and steady. He said, "I came here looking for a way to fix the past. I found a future instead. I promise to stand by you, to be your partner, to listen when you speak, and to build a life with you, side by side." Eliza's heart was so full she thought it might burst. She looked at the man before her, a man who had given away a fortune to heal a wound, a man who respected her strength and honored her heart. She said, "I spent a long time believing I had to be strong enough to stand alone. You taught me that true strength is found in standing together. I promise to be your partner, your friend, and your home. My hand is yours to hold." They did not need a preacher to tell them they were joined. They had forged their bond in crisis, in trust, and in a shared vision for a better world. As the sun began to set, casting a golden light through the leaves of the apple trees, Eliza stood with Cole on the small porch of her cabin, which was now their cabin. She thought of the journey that had brought them to this moment of quiet peace. Her gaze drifted toward the horizon, and she spoke, her words a quiet thought for herself alone. "We did not win with guns," she thought, "but by keeping our word." The soft evening light filtered through the new green leaves of the apple trees. From where they stood, they could hear the gentle, constant murmur of Willow Creek, full and alive. Cole's hand found hers, their fingers lacing together, a comfortable, familiar fit. It was not a hand that claimed or possessed, but a hand that sheltered, that promised, that walked beside. It was the hand of home. Thank you so much for listening to our story. Please comment where you are listening from so we can all connect and share our thoughts. And do not forget to subscribe to our channel Wild West Night. Like the video, and support us further by pressing the hype button so this story in the video can be heard by more people.